If you love bringing up shit from the past, this is 100% the genre for you. Hi, welcome, come on in. My name is Aoife, and today I am taking you through some of the historical fiction books that I think you need to put on your TBR for June this year. Why do you need specifically to read it in June? Well, if you are taking part in the amazing readathon run by Brianna from Fourth Paws in a Book, and you join Team General Fiction, captained by myself and by Cara from Cara's Bookshelf, our two genres are contemporary literary fiction and historical fiction. If you read a bunch of books that are historical fiction, you will gain the team 50 bonus points for every book in historical fiction that you read, so it is a super easy way to stack up a couple of extra points. There is some debate in the world as to what counts as a historical fiction book, but it is generally recognised as books that are set about 50 years before they were written. So that kind of means that anything that is set in or before the 1970s can be counted as historical fiction for this readathon. I will also tell you if these books will give you a bonus for having an LGBT author, or I will also tell you if they can get you a little bit of extra money because they are on the host favourite list. First up is Dear Mrs. Bird by A.J. Pierce. This follows Emmeline Lake, who is hired as the secretary from Mrs. Bird. Mrs. Bird is the agony aunt in the Women's Friend magazine, and she has a very particular way that she wants the letters in the magazine to look. There is nothing that can be any way controversial. So there can't be any topics about relationships. There can't be any topics about wanting to separate from your husband or not having a completely happy home life. However, Emmeline has noticed that there are a couple of letters coming in from women who really need some help and support. Women whose husbands are abusive, or women who are struggling with parenting, or women who just don't know how to get themselves through what's going on in the world. All of the action in the book is taking place during 1939 in London, and that was the start of World War II, so things are really starting to change for everybody in the book. There is a lot of talk about going through rationing, there is a lot of talk about people who are being sent off to the front lines, and it is a genuinely heartbreaking story at times. There are a couple of people that you lose along the way in the 3 books in this series, and it's such a heartbreaking look at what life was like for people who weren't on the battlefields and who weren't on the front lines, but who were left behind to just kind of keep going. I adore every single one of these books. I think the second book is my favorite of the entire series, and I definitely think it's one that you need to give a go. Next up is not just a book, but an author. Taylor Jenkins Reid has got 4 books in her kind of historical fiction series. First up is The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo. This is not just one of my host favourites, but one of my favourite books of all time. It follows Monique, who is a young reporter working for a newspaper, and she's called into the editor's office one day as she's told that she has been selected personally to do a kind of a story of Evelyn Hugo's life. Evelyn was a hugely successful screen siren back in the 1950s, but she has basically gone into recluse in the last 30 or so years. Nobody has heard anything about her, nobody has heard anything about her life. Monique is pretty sure that when she goes to speak to Evelyn, she's going to find out the story about all of the 7 husbands that Evelyn had across her life. However, Monique finds a lot more out about Evelyn's life, about who she was truly in love with, and why there is a connection between Evelyn and Monique that she never expected there to be. As I said, this is not just one of my host favourites, so you will get 100 extra GRC. This is one of my favourite books of all time. I reread it last year as part of the Amazing Readathon for one of the prompts, and it stood up so much. It is one of my favourites. I will recommend it to so many people, and it's definitely one that you need to put on your sites this year. If you're more so into the world of music than you are into the world of screen, then definitely go and check out Daisy Jones and the Six by Taylor Jenkins Reid. This is following Daisy Jones and the Six. Daisy was a hugely successful singer back in the 1970s, and she and the Six kind of joined forces to become a musical superpower. However, they had one successful single and also disappeared off the face of the earth. Nobody had ever heard anything about them since, but there is a documentary coming out that is going to tell the story all the way up to why they separated that fateful night. This book is absolutely recommended as an audiobook. It is told in interview form, so you are actually hearing the feedback from interviews of Daisy, of Billy, who was the frontman of the Six before Daisy turned up, of other people who were connected, such as Billy's wife, of the other members in the band, of their partners, of their manager, and it is so enthralling as an audiobook. It is full cast, so everybody has got a separate actor, and it will genuinely feel like you are listening to a documentary. Daisy Jones and the Six also got a Prime adaptation last year, so if you've read this book and you have fallen in love with it, definitely go and watch the adaptation because it really does hold true to the book. But if you don't want your historical fiction to have a kind of an artsy scene, you want it to have a more sporty scene, then go and check out Malibu Rising. This is following Nina and her three siblings. You will know their father, Mick Riva, from The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo, and this is telling their story, their whole life story, how Mick met his second wife, who is all of the children's father, and it all culminates in a massive party in Nina's mansion when it catches fire on the night. You're finding out how Mick and his wife June came to know each other. You're finding out their backstory, the relationship that they had, and the relationship that they had with their children, who are all big names in the world of surfing, particularly Nina, who is just about to break through as one of surfing's biggest stars. I absolutely adore this book. It is kind of full of debauchery and it is kind of full of chaos, but that just feels like the perfect thing to be reading during a chaotic readathon. The final historical fiction book from Taylor Jenkins Reid is Carrie Soto is Back. This one is following Carrie Soto, who is a world champion tennis player. She's been retired for about 5 or 6 years, but now somebody is coming in to dethrone her. Nikki Chan, an up-and-coming British tennis player, has just won her 20th World Slam, and this is equaling Carrie's record. She is feeling a little bit shaken by this, so she decides to come out of retirement for one more season to defend her honour and basically to get one up on Nikki. If you love the story of the Williams sisters, and particularly the fact that their father is their manager, this is a story that is definitely going to resonate with you. All the Light We Cannot See by Anthony Doerr follows Marie-Laure and Brianna. Marie-Laure is 12 years old and she is blind and living in Paris with her father in a house very near to the Natural History Museum. One night, when Paris is overtaken by the Nazis, she and her father flee to a tiny little town near the sea where his uncle is living in a small little ramshackle house, and they are here to basically keep themselves safe. What they have in their pockets is one of the most valuable things in the entire museum, and they have to fight to keep it in their hands. In Germany, Vienna, who is also about 12 or so years old, is so adept at repairing technology and fiddling around with radios that he is hired by the Nazis in order to quash the resistance. Their lives, the story tells the lives of the two children in a kind of an interweaving process until their lives interlock with one another's. Another book that is set during World War II and on my host's favourite list is The Book Thief by Markus Zusak. This is following Liesel, who is about 9 or 10 years old, and it's set in about 1940 to 1941. Liesel is going with her younger brother to a small town called Mölching near to Munich, and she and her brother are going to be fostered by two elderly people as their mother is a communist and she basically needs to flee to keep herself safe. On their way to Mölching, however, Liesel's younger brother passes away, and this had really pissed off her future foster mother, who was expecting the kind of allowance that would come from fostering two children rather than one, and it basically sours their whole relationship for most of the book. However, the relationship between Liesel and her foster father Hans is absolutely heartbreakingly beautiful. I absolutely love watching the two of them associate with one another and learn from one another. Liesel learns to read from her foster father, and she loves listening to him playing his accordion every single night. As I said, this book is set in World War II, and it is actually narrated by Death, who you would expect is having quite a busy period in his life at the moment. And I feel like this was such a great way of telling the story from the eyes of somebody who was almost unwillingly called in at most times. For a readathon, it feels really apt to recommend to you a book that is about a book club. So I am going to recommend to you The Guernsey Literary and Potato Peel Pie Society by Marianne Schaefer. Actually, Marianne died just before the book could be finished, so this is a kind of a tandem author one. This one is set in January 1946, and it is following Juliet, who is an author and suffering a little bit from writer's block. She doesn't really know where she's going to go with the next book or even what it should be about. One night when she is reading, she comes across a letter in one of her books that is directly addressed to her. The letter is written by a man who lives on the small Channel Island of Guernsey, and they are all overcoming the German occupation that had been present during World War II. In this letter, Juliet finds out about the book club that is on the island and how it had been set up as a kind of a defiance against the German occupancy when everyone who was in it had been kind of accused of breaking curfew and then used it as an excuse to get together, read books, and celebrate literature, but also kind of get themselves through what was happening outside. If you want your historical fiction to have a little bit of romance into it, why not go and check out the entire Bridgerton series by Julia Quinn? Of course, this has a hugely popular adaptation that is on Netflix at the moment, and the third series is due to come out in June, so this is definitely the time to go and pick them up and to try and fit them into one of the prompts. The series follows the 8 Bridgerton siblings and their chances at love and their lives and everything that is happening around them. I have read the first book in this and I had an okay time with it, but I'm definitely going to go and check out the rest of them, mainly because I want to go and watch the adaptation. I will watch anything that Nicola Coughlan is in, but I am a purist who needs to have read the series before they can go and watch the adaptation. Another historical fiction series with a romance in it is the Reputation series by Lex Croucher. Reputation follows Georgiana, who has been abandoned by her parents and moves to a small, tiny little town to live with her aunt and uncle and basically get herself back on her feet. While she is here, she falls in with Francis and Francis's group of friends, and as she gets to know them a little better and as her connections with them deepen, Georgiana is introduced to a world of debauchery and of kind of hijinks that she had never expected to fall into. This series of books has been described as Bridgerton meets New Girls. It's kind of a rom-com with a Regency twist to it. So if you're looking for kind of an ease into historical fiction, this one is genuinely a good one to go for. And if you're looking for a series that is going to gain you some extra bonus points, Lex Croucher is an LGBT author, so all 3 of the books in this series will get you that extra 50 points. All of the Shakespeare girlies out there should definitely check out Hamnet by Maggie O'Farrell. As you can imagine from the name, this is a loose retelling of the life of William Shakespeare. He is never mentioned by name in the story, he is just known as the writer. However, you do follow his wife Agnes and their 3 children, and you also learn of the illness and the death of his young son Hamnet, who was 11 years old at the time of his death. Following on from this death and from the grief that came from it, Shakespeare wrote one of his greatest plays, Hamlet. It is one of the longest plays in the Shakespearean works. It is one of the most celebrated and the most adapted of the Shakespearean works. And it is also the one that I studied for my Leaving Cert almost 15 years ago by this stage. So I think now might be a really good time for me to really dig into Hamlet and take a look at what life was like for Shakespeare at the time. Another historical fiction book by Maggie O'Farrell you need to check out is Instructions for a Heatwave, and I am not just telling you to read this because there is a character in it called Aoife. This is actually a really interesting story set among the backdrop of the huge heatwave that happened in Britain around 1976. One morning in July, when the heat is absolutely unbearable, Greta wakes up to realise that her husband, who had gone out for a newspaper, is not going to come back. This news brings their 3 adult children back to the homestead. It brings back Michael, who is a history teacher whose marriage is starting to fall apart. Monica, who has 2 stepchildren who really are not accepting Monica into the family. And Aoife, who is now living in New York and has arranged her entire life to keep hidden a massive secret that could cause devastation if it comes out. If in school your hyperfixation was on Tudor England, or you know the entire soundtrack to Six the Musical back to front, inside out, upside down, you need to check out the 6 Tudor Queen series by Alison Weir. This goes through the entire set of Henry VIII's wives, starting with Catherine of Aragon and finishing, of course, with Catherine Parr. It goes through all 6 of their stories, and it is so in-depth and also quite educational. It is obviously a fictionalized retelling of their lives, but you do find out so much about these women that I had even not known. Alison Weir also has got a lot of other books about other people from Tudor England. She's got books about Lady Jane Grey, she has got books about Elizabeth I, and if you were a big fan of Tudor England back in school, this is a series for you to go and pick up. Dominicana by Angie Cruz follows Anna, who is 15 and is married off to Juan, a much older man who is going to take her from the comfort of Dominicana. She's only ever known this country, right up to Washington Heights in New York City, an area full of immigrants from the Caribbean who are basically trying to make a brand new life for themselves. So, on New Year's Day 1965, Anna and her new husband set off for New York, and Anna has a hugely difficult time trying to adjust to her new home and her new surroundings. When political unrest starts to arise in Dominica and Juan is called back to Dominica, Anna starts to get to know his younger brother Cesar a lot better and discovers a whole new world that Juan had basically kept hidden from her. However, when he comes back to New York, what is Anna going to choose, her heart or her duty to her family? Hello Beautiful by Anne Napolitano follows William Waters, who lost his sister when she was young, and ever since his parents have not been able to look him in the eye. His house has become a place of silence, and he's not even sure that his parents actually love him. However, he pours his heart and soul into basketball, his one true love in life, and is so talented by the time he goes to college that he has earned a full ride scholarship. Here, he meets Julia, who is the love of his life, and introduces him to her three younger sisters. When he comes back to Julia's family to meet them, everyone welcomes him with open arms. Maybe some a little bit more welcoming than they were expecting. When everything starts to go into complete turmoil and chaos, you learn about how the lives of these four sisters are never going to be the same again, and connections that had been made will likely never last. Another romance series that might be a really good entryway into historical fiction is the Regency Vow series by Martha Waters. It begins with To Have and To Hoax, which follows Lady Violet and Lord James. They've been married for a couple of years, but they have really started to hate one another. Everything is starting to sour between the two of them, and they've barely spoken a word to each other all year. However, Lady Violet is informed that one day while James was out on his horse, he has fallen off and is now unconscious. It's not looking like it's going to turn out well for him, so she goes to be by his side because what dutiful wife wouldn't? What she actually discovers is that James is alive and well and sitting up at the bar at the local tavern, and things really start to explode from there. At present, there are 4 books in this series, with a 5th one coming out this year. So if you get really engrossed into this series, you have got plenty that you can look out for. There are a couple of historical fiction books that have a fantastical element to them. So if you're much more of a fantasy reader, these might be the entry level that you are looking for. The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue by V.E. Schwab follows Addie LaRue, who is living in 18th century France and has made a deal with the devil that she wants to become immortal. However, there is a price to pay with this deal. When she walks out of a room, anyone who had had a conversation with her or who had seen her will instantly forget who Addie is. She will be completely forgettable. However, about 300 years after this deal is made, Addie bumps into Henry and starts to have a conversation with him and walks away expecting the same thing to happen again. But Henry can remember who Addie LaRue is. Babel, or Babel, by R.F. Kuang is following the students of the Royal Institute of Translation, or Babel, which is in Oxford and London in the 1800s. You're following Robin, who has been brought over from Canton by Professor Lovett and is basically expected to study and to learn translation and then use that to be a silversmith and to melt silver down and to basically use it for some pretty evil gains. You are also following the other students that Robin gets to know in his time in Babel, and there is a huge fraction that is going to come up between the students, and which side are you going to take? Brooklyn by Colm Tóibín follows Ailish, who grew up in a small town in Wexford but has left home to go to New York to find a better life for herself. Her mother and her sister are backing her every single step of the way, but Eilish is feeling completely homesick the second that she sets foot into New York. Her travel over is awful. She's not feeling at home. She is not settling into New York at all until she finds love and until she really starts to make a couple of steps to make New York feel like home. If you are an immigrant or have also left your own home to set up a new life elsewhere, this book is really going to speak to you. Under the Hawthorn Tree by Marita Conlon McKenna is the first in the Children of the Famine series, and it is following 3 young children, Eileen, Michael and Peggy, who are 10, 7 and 5 at the beginning of this book. They have lost their parents and their infant sister to hunger and disease at the beginning of the famine, and they know that to avoid the workhouse, which is rife with disease and with hunger, the only way that they're going to survive is if they leave their hometowns and go to a distant village named Castle Taggart, where 2 aunts of their mother are now living. On the journey, you are following them through all of the disease and through all of the death and also through all of the heartbreak that they are going through on their journey. But there are also some really nice moments of togetherness and of family that will really boil your heart while you're reading this book. Lessons in Chemistry by Bonnie Garmus follows Elizabeth, who is the only woman working in a research centre, and their ideas of equality and of feminism are not quite the same as what they would be today. Elizabeth is fired, but is instead put on a TV cooking show called Supper at 6. Elizabeth begrudgingly takes on the new role, but brings a little bit of her chemist background into the cooking show and starts to show people what molecular cooking might be like, or how they can apply their knowledge of fire, or how they can apply their knowledge of what happens to water to make their meals a little bit better. This might not be what the executives are looking for a cooking show back in 1961, but it might just be the start of feminism that Elizabeth is looking for. Sarah Waters is a hugely popular historical fiction writer, and I definitely think you should go and check out Fingersmith. This one follows Susan Trinder, who is a pickpocket or a fingersmith, and she has lived her life under the care of Mrs. Suxby, as she knows that her mother is dead and that there is no other family who can take care of her. However, Susan is connected to a young orphan miles and miles across the country that she has no idea exists, but their lives are about to collide in a way nobody could ever expect. Those are all of the historical fiction books that I think you should go and check out for the month of June for the Amazing Readathon. Are there any of those that were already on your TBR? Have I inspired you to put them on? Or what is one historical fiction book that you think I need to put on my shelf? If you'd love to leave me a comment but you can't think of anything you'd like to say, then just leave the old classical building emoji. Don't forget to like and subscribe because I have new videos up every week. Now, get on out of here.